We're going to take some of the things that we've been learning about CSS3 transitions and transformations, and we're going to apply them to a new page in the Nessie website. So this page is the gallery page right here, and you'll see that there's going to be several things that we're going to apply the CSS3 transitions to. The first one is the navigation. When I hover over any of the navigation items, the image is going to change position. It's also going to change color, so it'll go from being the black version to a colored version. And finally, the text is going to transition from white to blue. The other thing that we're going to do is in the gallery section, we're going to build this gallery page, and when you hover over, the images are going to get larger, and they'll also come in front of any other images, and we're also going to go ahead and put a drop shadow behind the images so they kind of stand off the page a little bit more. And all of these things are going to be accomplished using our CSS3 transitions and transformations. So the page that we'll start working on looks like this. As you can see, when I hover over the links, they don't move or change colors. We just have the regular hover state of the links displaying, which is the text changes color when you hover over. I've also placed the images into the column B section of the page, and they are simply just kind of the thumbnail sized images. So let me just show you in the HTML what I have. Here's my HTML, and the only thing that I added here was I modified the index page and I changed the header in column A, and then inside of column B I added a div with a class of gallery wrap, and I placed images and I defined width and height on the images and gave them alt tags, of course, and then all of these images are just displaying in the area that we have available. The website currently does work somewhat responsively. You can see that when I go from the large screen to the more narrow screen that the images do change to one column, but they are going to stay smaller. Ultimately, what we want to have happen here is when we go to the smaller screen view, the images are going to take up the maximum space they have available. What we're also going to do here is when the page is at the smaller size, we're not going to have that transition occurring because the images are almost at their largest size at this point, and they're plenty big to be able to see all of the details. So we won't have that functionality happening. We will have the links, though, animate like I described earlier. So let's go ahead and let's add some CSS to our page so that when we're at the smaller size, our page takes on the formatting that we want, which is that the images will be large and they will display in a one-column view. In order to do this, we're going to be changing some of the CSS and adding some new CSS rules. Inside of our CSS file that we had been working on, I'm going to go into the main body content, which has our rules for column A and column B. They will remain as we described them before. I am going to make a new rule, though, for gallery wrap, which is the class name of the div that I assigned around the gallery images. And I'm going to set margin on the top and bottom of 5 pixels and auto for the right and the left. And then I am going to use a text align of center, and this will just ensure that the images are going to center align in the area that we have available. So if we save the page and look at it in the browser, you can see that the formatting has changed in that these are now centered and they're just being pushed away from the bottom and the top by 5 pixels. The next rule that we're going to declare is going to allow the images to display at their large size. So I'm going to make a more specific selector for .gallery wrap img, which is going to target the images within this section. We're going to go ahead and we're going to set the width to 100%, and we're going to set the height to auto. And then we'll go ahead and we'll set the margin settings to 5 pixels for the top and the bottom, and 0 for the right and the left. Now when I save, if I go back into the browser and refresh, you can see that our images are going to appear at the large size and they will appear in one column. So this is exactly what we want for our smaller screen. When I make the screen bigger, however, the images are not tiling in the manner that we want. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create some rules that will appear down in our media queries so that this section of the page is going to function in the way that we want. I'll go down to the media query section, and after column A and column B, I'm going to make a new rule for my gallery wrap images. And what we'll have happen here is we're going to set the width to 45%. We're going to set the height to auto, and that should solve the problem. If we go back into the browser, we're now going to have the responsive look in which the images are small and tile at the large screen, and when we go to our smaller screen, they're going to become large and appear like this. Now at the larger screen, we get the images appearing in the grid-like layout like we like. I just want to add a couple more rules just to adjust the spacing. I'm going to use my nth of type to add some additional margin to the odd images, so 1, 3, and 5. We're going to add some margin on the right to push 2, 4, and 6 over a little bit more so that the page will be laid out in a more uniform manner. To do this, I'm going to add a selector for the image nth of type odd, and what we'll declare here is we're going to declare that we want a margin of 5 pixels on the top and the bottom, 10 pixels on the right and the left, and then I'm going to go up to the gallery wrap image, and I'm just going to add a margin of 5 pixels for the top and the bottom and 0 for the right and the left. Now if we go back and we refresh, we can see that our grid layout is going to look a little bit cleaner because we've just added some additional spacing here. Now we're ready to add some transition settings so that when we hover over these images, the images will transition in and show a larger version of the picture. It is worth noting that the images I'm displaying, I've saved them at the largest size that I want them to display at. So these images are being scaled down because of the code that I placed inside of my CSS, which changes the width to 45%. So they are showing at 45% of their original size. Inside of our selector for the gallery wrap image, I'm going to add my transition property, and I'm going to use the shorthand notation and specify that I want to transition all. I want the transition to happen in 5 seconds. I want to use ease, and I want the delay to have a 1/4 second time. So when you first hover over it, it'll be a very slight delay until the transition kicks in. Remember, by using the keyword all, this is going to allow all properties to transition, scaling, box shadowing, whatever we want to have happen. Let's save, and if we go back into the browser and refresh, you can see that currently nothing is really happening yet, and that's because I also need to place the properties that I want to change on the hover behavior. All I did was really flick that switch on and just say that I wanted to have the ability to apply transition. I haven't actually specified what any of those changes are going to be or when they should occur. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come down and we're going to make a selector for gallery wrap img:hover, and this will allow us to specify what we want to have happen on the hover. So here I'm going to use my transform property, and the first thing that we want to transform is scaling. So on scaling, we're going to scale our images up by 1.5. This will bring them up so that they're going to be 1.5 times as large as they currently are. Remember that when we use transform, it's not fully supported in all of the browsers, so we need to add our vendor prefixes, at least for the WebKit browsers. The next thing that we want to have happen is we want the box shadow to also be added. So I'm going to put box shadow, and for box shadow I'm going to add 3 pixels for the horizontal, 3 pixels for the vertical, 5 pixels for the blur, and we're going to add a color of 000, which is black. If we save now and go look in the browser, you can see when I refresh the page and hover over, we get a really nice effect in that the images are going to scale up and also appear with a drop shadow. So it brings a little bit more prominence to the images and they stand out a little bit more on the page. Now that I'm looking at these, I think I would like to have a very thin border appearing as well. So we'll go ahead and we'll just add that in as well. and we'll just add a solid 1 pixel border, and we're just going to make it a dark gray color. I'm going to just reorganize these rules and place them above the transform rules. I'll save my page, and if we go look in the browser, you can now see that I get a slight border that appears around the images. So I just think that that frames the images a little bit better. I like the way that looks. The gallery section of the page is now completed. The next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll style the navigation. We want the navigation to happen at any size. Right now, our gallery does not have the hover behavior on the small screen, and we decided we didn't need that since the images were already appearing fairly large. But at the smaller screens, we definitely want the larger images to appear. The effect that we're going to place on the navigation, however, is something that we want to occur regardless of any size screen. It is worth noting that if you are on a mobile device, you're not going to have the hover behavior anyways, but we'll go ahead and style it just in case someone is viewing this on a narrow screen on a non-mobile device. It's not going to hurt to place it on there. It's not going to really add any additional file size per se, so we might as well just add it in throughout our web page. I'm going to go up to the section of my web page where I have navigation. So here is the header and navigation section, and we already have some rules in here for our navigation. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to add some transition settings to our nav A. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to add transition. And remember, this is just acting like a switch so that I can use transition. I'm going to say that I want this to affect everything. We're going to say that we want it to happen in, let's just say 1.5 seconds. We'll make it a little longer just so we can really see it happening. And I'm going to specify that I want to use easing. For these, I'm not going to pass on a timing delay, so we just won't declare that particular part of the animation. If I go ahead and save my page and we go look in the browser, you can see that nothing has changed yet with the images, but already we see the change occurring on the text. So as I hover over the text, you can see that there is now a 1.5 second fade that goes from being blue to white, and then when I hover away, it goes back to being blue. So that part is already happening, and that's because of the current declarations that we already have. On nav A hover, I have specified that my color is changing to white, so that's something that is being changed. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to add some additional selectors to our nav A. It is worth noting that we already have the background property defined for nav A. We've set the images to not repeat, and we've specified their size as being 0% and 20 pixels. This of course is adjusting the images so that they are positioned and tucked underneath the navigation. Since we already have that declared in our nav A, we're going to go to our nav A hover, and we're going to set a new rule here that is going to set the background position to 0, 0. When we save right now and we go look in the browser, when I hover over, you can see that now the little icons are going to raise up. And you can see it's a nice smooth transition that occurs right there. What's happening is that the background position is now also being transitioned or tweened over 1.5 seconds. So that looks pretty good. The final thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the color of these images. To do that, we want to transition the background image. So I have these black icon images that I've made, and I also have a set of blue icon images that I've made. We have our nav home link, for instance, and if I copy this selector right here and go ahead and paste this down below and make it a nav home hover and change the background image to my BTN2 home image, which is a blue version of the exact same image. If I save this and refresh, we're going to see that this works just fine. So simply using a selector of nav home :hover and specifying the new background image is going to allow these images to also take on the tween behavior. I'll go ahead and I'll just copy the rest of these selectors right here. I'm going to paste them in, and we'll change them all to occur on the hover state, and I'll change the images to all show the BTN2, which is the blue version of all of the images. And now I'll save my CSS, and if we go back into the browser and refresh, you can see that when I hover over all of the images, I get a beautiful transition that changes the images from being the black version to the blue version when we're hovered over. And you can see these subtle changes are just making my page appear a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more visually interesting. However, without these settings working, so if an older browser came across and simply ignored these rules, we wouldn't lose any functionality. The user would still be able to navigate to any of the additional pages. They would still be able to see the gallery images just fine. They just wouldn't appear quite as large. But you can see through the use of CSS3 transitions and transformations, we're able to add a little more pizzazz to our website.